like one line of metro, and then we have to change to metro 141. And just walk the trains, like the central station.
Ah, yes, of course. Yeah. Maybe we can. Should we organize it? I don't know what we can do.
Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you at the third event in connection to Warsaw's Knowledge Exchange, entitled Reinventing Public Service Media in the Age of Platforms, Organization, Culture and Independence. Today, and tonight I would say, we are taking the approach to discuss the challenges of public service media in relation to broader social, cultural, and also political point of view. We thought that in addition to what we discussed earlier today at TVP and also yesterday in relation to holistic view on audiovisual film industry and the future of the film industry, we would like to do something different, in a sense that we propose to organize civic-driven debate, so citizen debate, that is going to be around media capture and the cultural polarization. Just to start, this debate is co-organized together with the Citizens Pact for Public Service Media, and it's supposed to be chaired by Beata Chmiel. We hope that she feels better in a very, very moment. But she apologizes that she cannot be here with us today. So having successfully mapped what are the key challenges for public service media in the age of platforms from the organizational point of view, our attention now moves towards the context. But before we give the floor to our fantastic speakers who will participate in our debate, let me warmly welcome our dean for the third time, Professor Dariusz Kuźmina. Welcome back. And also let me welcome the Malwina Gębalska, who is actually representing the National Science Center. And I know that Malwina, you wanted to say a few words at the beginning of the civic debate, because what I'm learning is that the civic participation and also doing science in terms of a broader scale of stakeholders is something that you are now very much interested in. Can we welcome you here?
Thank you, Michał. Good evening, my name is Malwina Gębalska and I represent the National Science Center in Poland. We are based in Kraków. We are a research funding agency and normally we fund basic research. However, with support from the European Commission, European funding, we also want to support research that is that reaches out to non-academic stakeholders and wants to engage with policymakers, business, and civil society. And the CHANCE, which stands for Collaboration of Humanities and Social Sciences in Europe, is one of these programs. And we are very happy to fund the PSMAP, Public Service Media in the Age of Platforms project within this program, and congratulations to the whole consortium. It was a wonderful experience to listen to your debates today and your experience. I want to also take this opportunity to tell you about the new program that we are building now, also together with the European Commission and other member states and funders from Europe. So it's called Social Transformations and Resilience. And in this project, we'll be encouraging the research community to engage with non-academic stakeholders even more. And we also want to develop this program together with non-academic stakeholders, with civil society organizations, NGOs, companies, and also public sector and public administration. So you will for sure hear more about this program, and we will be also consulting the topics and priorities of this program together with other stakeholders, not only researchers. So thank you for inviting us here, Michał, and congratulations on organizing this event. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you so much for being here, Malvina, and for the introduction. And on to the debate. Let me first introduce the speakers who agreed to speak about media capture, cultural polarization, but perhaps also some democratic innovation that can maintain the project of public service media. First of all, we have Bisera Zankova from Media 21 Foundation, Bulgaria. Then we have Mariusz Dragomir, Director of the Center of Media and Journalism Research. Then we have Kuba Wygnański, a representative of the Polish NGO Stycznia. And last but not least, we have Czedomir Markov, who represents University of Belgrade, but also, I know, some innovation of Democracy Lab. All right, let me start with the broad question. Maybe you, as the experts on cultural, political polarization and political parallelism, you would like to introduce yourself in the topic, perhaps in 5 minutes, how you explore, how you tackle the problem of a wider context in which public service media function. And maybe you would like to refer to some of your experience, some of the studies you've done, or some of the work you've done as a public service media defender. Shall we start with you, Bisera?
Thank you, Michal. Very briefly, on public service media, first, I would like to say a few words because for many years I have been working at the Council of Europe on Council of Europe documents, including recommendations related to public service media, and it is there that we work together also with Karol Jakubowicz and with Michał Głowacki. So, in my view, the problems of public service media are problems that would always be interesting and always be discussed, no matter in what kind of age we live. Either we live, whether we live in the age of platformization or in another age, because we all need public service media. First it was public service broadcasting, then public service broadcasting transformed into public service media. And now we speak about the relationships of public service media with the platforms and about the content produced by public service media, how it can get prominence and be carried by platforms. Also, the problem of the public service remit is one issue that is very topical. And now it is also topical how we can define the remit in the time when there is such great competition, not only with commercial media, but also with different platforms. And within this very broad context, of public service media that represent a source of educational, informational, cultural, and all other types of inspiration, we can see what are the dangers for public service media, and we can tackle also other problems of the guarantees for better funding of public service media, their independence, and problems related to media capture. I would say that media capture is not only a problem of commercial media or all type of media. Yes, it is a problem of all type of media, especially of public service media. So I have done some research on the so-called captured regulation in the media, but maybe I pass now the microphone to my colleagues, Mariusz Dragomir, who has done a great research in this area. So please, you follow.
Thank you. Am I allowed? Yeah. Thank you. Well, first of all, it's great to be here. I want to start by saying that a lot of what I'm going to talk about comes from research. It was mentioned here. Our center, the Media and Journalism Research Center, is a research-focused institution hosted by an academic institution, which is the University of Santiago de Compostela, but we are very much and very often engaging with civil society, so I'm glad that you made that introduction, because we like to use the research, and somebody, I think, earlier in the session said that we should speak more on the language of everyone and introduce and make the research more accessible. Very briefly to the media capture, because and also I wanted to say that I listened to some of the discussions before, and I learned a lot about the internal problems that public service media is facing today. But just to frame a bit the discussion, we indeed did some work on the issue and the concept of media capture, and there is a lot of literature today, a lot of scholars analyzing the topic. But at some point we try to take this approach and understand the phenomenon more with the idea to really understand how it happens in practice and why is it important. So we began to analyze and map and research various patterns in a number of countries in Europe, and we realized that media capture can be understood in a narrow sense. We can use it to describe a situation where a medium, a media outlet is captured by the government, by commercial interests, and so on. But if you really want to understand how capture works, we realized that there is a pattern of media capture, and we found 4 components, and they are the following. One is the regulatory capture. This is when governments, when you win the elections and you get to the government, one of the first things that you do, you go and take control over the regulator. It's quite easy. You appoint your members of the council, and then they basically make decisions and do your bidding. The second element that we identified, and that's why I think it's an important concept because it includes the public service media. The second element is public service media. And again, that's an element that is an experience that you see in many countries. Again, it's very easy, in fact, for many people, for governments to take control over the media in many countries in Europe, because once you win the elections, in many places you have the right and you have the power to appoint people in the governance structures. The third element is the public funding. We have noticed a trend in many places where governments are using funding not only to fund public media, but also to actually fund private media in the form especially of state advertising. This is a problem that we identified in many places. And the problem is not that you fund the media, but the problem is the lack of transparency and the fact that you use this as a tool to control the media, and we have plenty of examples there. And the fourth element, which is quite, I think, is the distinguishing element from the definitions of, for example, media ownership concentration that we had 20 years ago. Many people or students are asking me, what is the difference? We had media ownership concentration forever, all the time. What is the difference between that and media capture? Well, this is the element, the fourth element, and this is when governments, usually not directly, but with the help of businesses associated with them, they take over private media. And they do it in a very systematic way. So if you really think about these 4 elements, we described this model in a paper, and then we discussed it a lot. So you take control over the regulation. These are the regulators giving licenses, controlling the media field. You take over the public service media. You use the public funds, basically our money, to fund the media that you like, and then you take over a lot of the private media. So for those of you who we are in the media, you imagine the level of control that you achieve over the narrative and the communication in a market. Now, this is, I think it's important to keep in mind, because public service media should be understood in this broader context. You cannot reform or think about a vision about public service media without understanding the other forces that are in the market. And now, for some years, we have been looking at another 5th element, we called it, of the media capture, which is the tech element. This is something that we struggle to integrate, because in many places, and maybe it's time to give examples, Hungary was the textbook example, we called it, of media capture. This is a place that if you go back in history, you will see that in 2010, when Orban and the Prime Minister Viktor Orban and his party won the elections, he started this process systematically. So go back and you will see exactly what he did. The first, he took over a regulator, public service media. He switched the public funding from a lot of media outlets towards the friendly media outlets, and then over the next 14 years, he took over a lot of private media. Poland was on the way to achieve that. Unfortunately, it stopped after the last elections. But I'm mentioning that because this fifth element, the tech companies, the internet, when you looked at these media captured environments, this was the place where you can evade, where you could actually find independent journalism. Back to Hungary, most of the media are controlled by the government. The only media outlets that could operate independently were a few investigative journalism outlets like Atlazo, Direct 36, that started their operations online. Now, with the disturbing developments that we have seen over the past week, in fact, and this is not happening now, we have to really acknowledge that over the past 5 years maybe, we have seen that tech companies, in fact, which are commercially driven entities, were not actually anymore the place for independent journalism. In fact, we had, for example, evidence showing that Google, for example, didn't care to rank independent media on their site. They actually ranked those that were commercially viable. And most of them were actually controlled by the government in Turkey. So there is evidence that actually they stopped playing that place, that oasis of freedom. And now when we are looking at what this how to call it, this collusion between the tech sector and the government in the US, which I expect to start being propagated to other countries, I think we are adding the fifth element, which is very troubling, probably the most troubling element to this equation, and with, I think, with far-reaching consequences, not only for the public service media, but for the overall independent journalism.
Thank you so much, Mariusz. On to Czadomir. Your experience with the media capture, but also democratic innovation to combat polarization and capturing the media.
Thank you. Thank you for this question and for the opportunity to talk about that. Well, my research background is a little bit different. I don't really study the practices, the journalistic practices or cultures. I'm more interested as a researcher in audience-media relations. So I can speak more about this from the audience side. And when I started this research, I was interested in things like media trust, or in the case of Serbia, media distrust. And then I was obsessed with making the difference between media distrust, which is a normative concept, and media cynicism, which was the sentiment that I felt was prevalent and describes Serbian citizens' relations to other public institutions, not only to the media. But several years ago, I joined the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory, where I met a research group who was conducting research on democratic innovations. And the way they started this was, there was already a lot of mounted evidence on the benefits of democratic innovations and structured deliberation, in particular through mechanisms like citizens' assemblies, but most of that evidence was coming from the West. And this research group wanted to test what happens when we apply such mechanism in a hybrid state, hybrid regime or authoritarian regime like Serbian. And so I think it was in 2020 when we organized our first citizen assemblies on the topics of air pollution, expansion of pedestrian zone, things like that. And since then, we, in partnership with non-governmental organizations, we have conducted numerous citizen assemblies on various topics, from school safety, food labeling, then there was one on the access to social care system for marginalized people, etc., etc. So there are many of them. And if I can summarize our main takeaways, I would say that for the citizens who are involved as participants in citizen assemblies, these experiences are very unique, and we receive extremely high evaluation of the entire process. On the one hand, what they appreciate maybe the most is what we call the briefing stage. This is the part when they receive impartial and diverse information on the topic that we are dealing with, that covers various perspectives and their main arguments. And this is the kind of information that is often lacking in hybrid regimes like Serbia. So this is one part of these processes that is particularly important, but then there is the structured deliberation. So a process where these citizens can freely discuss on those topics with other citizens in small, moderated discussions where they weigh between different arguments, trying to come up with policy solutions and recommendations. This is why we say that democratic mini-publics and citizens' assemblies are actually schools of democracy. They are places where citizens can practice democratic political behavior, which again is lacking throughout Western Balkans and maybe Serbia in particular. And maybe of particular importance to this workshop is that one of the citizen assemblies that we organized was on the topic of combating disinformation. This is an exercise that we organized late in 2023, I think it was October, in collaboration with European Partnership for Democracy. We organized this citizen assembly in Belgrade, and then the same format was replicated in Kosovo, Montenegro, and Bosnia. And I can say that we find the whole exercise to be a huge success. And I'll explain why. People who joined, people who were participating in this citizen assembly were very well engaged with the problem of disinformation and how to combat them. There was this huge sense of them recognizing this as a huge issue, feeling powerless in certain ways, but also wanting to break this pattern and wanting to do something about it. When they first came, there was this overwhelming feeling that they are angry, and most measures that they were endorsing in the beginning were extremely punitive. They were endorsing extreme sanctions toward people who are found to be spreading disinformation, so putting extremely high financial fines, even imprisoning such people. They were also in favor of licensing journalists, things like that. But after the assembly finished, the support for such measures dropped at the expense of more softer measures, measures like civic education, directing funds toward professional journalism, fact-checking initiatives, media literacy initiatives, and self-regulatory mechanisms. So there was a much more nuanced understanding of what journalism is, how important it is for for information order instead of information disorder. And once again, we saw that the experts who were involved in the process, who were very skeptical in the beginning, telling us things like, I don't know how to combat disinformation. How will citizens who lack critical information, how they will be able to help us with that? But then in the end, they were very surprised and they were very satisfied with both the quality of the debate and deliberation that took place, but also with how sensible their recommendations were in the end. And so this is where the success of our exercise ends. Because what we struggle the most still is the follow-through. And what we struggle the most is engaging decision makers. So first of all, when we try to involve them at various stages of citizen assembly, whether it is a briefing stage or participating in a plenary session at the citizen assemblies, decision makers in Serbia typically ignore our calls. In most cases, we don't get any answer. This seemed to be specifically Serbian problem. What I hear from other colleagues in Western Balkans, in Croatia and Bosnia and Montenegro, they don't face such challenges. At least someone, if not decision makers, then policy makers will be there. We don't get that. And also you can imagine that when we send out the recommendations that citizens come up during these deliberations, they're not very interested in not even implementing them, but considering them seriously or putting them to National Assembly for discussion and things like that. And I just want to wrap up also with an information that I think is relevant for this workshop, and that is that our initiative caught the attention of other media practitioners in Serbia, and in particular Independent Journalists Association of Serbia, who will organize 4 citizen assemblies that will be tied to developing the new media strategy for Serbia. And the first citizen assembly is going to be on the topic of public service media and how citizens could be engaged in a more meaningful way in value creation and content creation and policy initiatives surrounding public media system. And this is something that we are planning for April this year, and I was very happy to participate in this workshop because I think many of the things I heard today are going to help us designing it, and I hope you will follow our output.
Thank you so much for this introduction, Chadomir. I think that you already raised a couple of important questions, but before we address them, let's give the floor to Kuba.
Let's give the mic. That's the
Exactly.
I already have a
Let's
floor.
start with that one.
I was questioning myself whether it might get a sense to be. I mean, but actually, my comparison. I'm a journalist, but my main field of operation, if you like, is the civic participation. That would be nice to talk on this kind of, probably not here because we have a lot in common. We actually, in Shipyard, we do a lot of public participation, and the media is part of that. We recently made the first ever civic assembly based on the randomized group of 100 people on the energy poverty. And we were promised politically that that is one of those promises which never, we will see, put it that way, that actually the question of sole existence of a public media and its governance structure should be a subject of civic panel. Of those of you who don't know that thing, that's basically is trying to make that miracles, and it works, to basically transfer those kind of a randomized group of people. And the first thing we check, that they are not activists. So they are not a public, they are jury. It's a very, very different thing. So we spent 5 days on those things. Anyway, that's a bigger question, whether democracy, without that kind of innovation, which sounds to you ridiculous, although even Athens, or the most stable Italian republic for 800 years were run by people elected by lot, not by election. And there's a very stable system. But anyway, if there will be space to discuss, because I understand what you're saying, those kind of different capture techniques and the 5, it's almost Machiavellian that you provide, advices to the prince how to make the thing. And the one other thing is basically the governance. So I'm one of the promoter, although I'm not very influential, the very special governing structure, which basically preclude winning electoral, party as being perceived as the only kind of a fundamental source of legitimization of a public interest. So it's basically part of that is based on the random, on a kind of a structured random, if you say, control mechanism for the media. I was myself the chief of the programming board of Polish national TV, and they resigned in 2014, and that was completely before the new government appeared with all those manipulations. I thought that their concept of what is public was very weak. Because what they understand is basically a quota system. So there's like whether the time given to the left or right is equal. So there was like a diminishing the role of media. It was like like a microphone giving. So I think it's not the public media, which brings me to the point that if you even contemplate the public service media, which means it's not the public media, it's public serving media. Okay, let's stop here. It means that the word public is important. And we have a public here. There's a question whether it's a public or, if I can say, republic. because it's not the same. It's, you know, you might be equally the crowd. I'm here to, you know, to make amusement for you. Amused you to death. It was a very fabulous book of sociologists, and we are in the phase of amusing ourselves to death. And the whole problem with demos or public is that it easily be a crowd or a mob, or as we believe, a kind of, even Aristotle has this distinction between democracy and politeia. And democracy was perceived as a weak structure, with governance structure. And the politeia was the thing which was really valuable. But it means that the people who are sitting are basically concerned not about their own interest only, and arithmetical kind of going back and forth and checking forces, but there is concept of a public. There's concept of a public good, republic, if you like. It's not the Trump, you know, electoral base. It's something like republic. We have a problem with that because we already have a problem with anything being bigger than us. And the concept of republic, which is not given, which is negotiated, is the essence of how the public should be created, with not this kind of order giving, and that's the other concept of what is civil society, because some people, I'm called in that country, and I'm basically self-ridiculing myself, Pope of the third sector. People basically think about me like that person. The problem is a very weak sector, and there's a very weak Pope, but the thing, and I spent a lot of my life basically calculating number of NGOs, whether, you know, it's not enough. In number, and you can see in civil society a set of institutions, it's not. Basically, after Weimar Republic, which was most densely populated country 100 years ago, and they did what they did, because the concept of having an organization, it's not protecting you from this kind of hijacking and being very much extremist. So the question is what we can find in common, and that are the kind of a simplest, but also very, in a sense, misleading concept of civil society is basically set of organization. If you go further, you will say civil. And it's very, in English, in Polish, there's no distinction in your languages, civil and civic. And the one of the sources of a civil society is, you can say, it's not barbarian, it's not militaristic, it's civil, in the sense of a good manner. So civil means that we talk, we might have a difference, you know, so it's even more about neighbors than the government, you know, it's more horizontal than the vertical. And the part of the civility in the age of anger, in the age of everybody trying to understand who you are by basically pointing your enemy. This is a chemical weapon which is used by all parties, even here in this country. They know it works. They know it works. So in the public media, I have to land somewhere, and I was supposed to say a completely different thing, but I think to contemplate the concept, and also the word service. I'm at your service. Who I'm going to please? You are going to, you know, I think in the Shelley's Frankenstein, it's a moment when already Frankenstein, you know, killed the poet. And he said to Dr. Frankenstein, you are my creator, but I'm your master. And I think it's a very deep truth in that we create all that thing and then we cannot control the thing. So I think the whole question of who is owning a public media and what is the role of civil society, oversight, defend, providing content, you know, and there's a long list of things. And I agree that the public service media is not necessarily only public media. They might be, I don't know, these days US is maybe not the best case, but they don't have a public media they have a national public radio. They have a big network of universities being, you know, able to provide, and I'm the graduate from that university. What can I tell you? Here, the university is called Radio Campus, and I can say it only in Polish, and their claim is tylko sztosy. You know, that's my expectation of what is the academic-based public radio. I'm not diminishing their possibility to be the thing. But actually, the same question is about the academia, because all that kind of a complicated structure of defending, fortifying democracy, which right now is suicidal. If we go that way, 5 years ago, if I say populism, it's not against democracy, it's its essence. And right now we see that if we are not inventing things like that, so people are making decisions not based on their emotion, passions, their internal feeling of being right. I mean, that's the very dangerous way. And we need politicians to create different institutional framework to see people are not stupid. I remember talking with My Way 100, and actually was using Lorenzetti, good and bad government, to those people to say, you know, you are not in position right now to judge whether that concrete solution of the energy poverty, it suits you. Let's imagine, and it's a classical roles argument on the fairness, imagine that you're in a random choice, you are not the guy who has have a kind of a very well, zero emission, you have enough money, but you might be on the other side. So let's invent a public policy, which the main criteria is not worsening the situation who are already the worst. So it's a kind of a ABC of a policy, although it's very hard to implement. And to land somewhere what I could say, in Poland, I think it's I was involved, probably we were talking about in many those kind of a daydreaming of, we have, in none of those countries, we have this kind of a public promise of all oppositional parties, making in the public space, vis-a-vis building of censura, how we call censorship, hated censorship since 1718. They promise that first day they win, they create this kind of a new media. Right now, I don't know whether people from the Ministry of Culture, but already we wait for a year to have a serious conversation about how this legislation will look like. Whether it will be part of a big panel, I don't know. But to end, I think with all that I saw, that either we invent governance structure which is basically have a prohibitory mechanism of not taking over, because they will win an election. I don't even want to think what is going to happen, because it's extremism going. So either we have to create that mechanism, or it's better to sink it as the French fleet in Toulon, because it's going to make so much disasters. Everyone, I would rather say, let's have a private media, I don't know, civic media, whatever. But this kind of fortified ship of public media, which are captured by not the public, but by the party, is extremely dangerous to democracy.
Thank you so much, Kuba. We also know the effects of media capture, right? Divided nations, divided families. We have a Christmas celebration, and people don't really speak about politics anymore. But I will now move to Mariusz. Is there any geography of the media capture? I know that you have conducted research outside Europe. I think that would be interesting for all of us to see whether it's about how major the democracy is, or whether it's in connection to some other cultural indicators.
I can speak about that and try to answer based on a couple of studies I mentioned. One of them is called State Media Monitor, that we expanded to 170 countries, is now in the 5th year, where we try to analyze what we call state-administered media, so in countries also authoritarian regimes, based on 3 sets of criteria. One is governance, that you just mentioned, a key element. The second, funding mechanism, and the third, mechanisms for ensuring editorial independence. So when you measure these 3 elements, basically you end up with a matrix, 7 models with various levels of control. Now, when you look at that, I think we have to distinguish between media-captured environments and state-controlled environments, like the type of China, North Korea, and Venezuela, where you have state-entrenched models where the state controls basically everything, your thoughts, media, and everything. Then when it comes to the model of capture that I mentioned to you, this appears in various types of regimes, hybrid regimes, imperfect democracies, where basically you have the democracy in place, but at the root of that, in fact, I really believe it's not the ideology. Media capture is essentially economic. Going back to just to give you some examples, I mentioned Hungary, Poland was in danger, Turkey, but then if you go outside Europe, you have examples like Egypt with different elements where the intelligence controls the media. You have examples like Cambodia in Southeast Asia, examples in Latin America, Nicaragua, and so on. The most important thing here, I think, is to look at the economic factor, because basically what is happening, why Orban in Hungary doesn't want to lose the elections is because losing the elections means losing access to public resources, and public resources give him actually the place in this media ecosystem. So there are examples, at various levels on these metrics. What's important to say is that it's not everywhere, of course, and when you look just back to Europe, when you look at the European news ecology, you have, of course, we identified a number of models. You have countries with with the public interest, what we call public interest news journalism model, like the Nordic countries. Then you have a model that we call it corporatized model, now in UK, countries like France, where companies are you have independent journalism, but sometimes very affected by various interests, sometimes corporate interests, and I think the British print media is in that case. And then you have the media capture model, and you have another model, I'm not sure whether it's the place here to speak about, we call it the atomized model. You have countries like Romania or North Macedonia, countries in the Balkans, where you have a lot of media outlets. You don't have capture there, actually. You have the feeling of a lot of competition, but when you look at them, there is actually no independence there. They are run by various parties for their own, various parties not in sense of political parties, various owners for various interests. So this is, the capture is there, it's spreading, this is the problem, and you have perfect, let's call them, captured environments, but you have elements that are appearing in various places, and that's, I think very, very problematic. And then I think the big question is the question that you had here at the whole event: what is the place of the public service media in this ecology? And we can get into that if you want.
Yes, I'm sure we will. At least we'll try, right? But before, I would like to ask you, Bisera, from your perspective and experience, from the lawyer perspective. Yeah. Can you say a bit more about media capture and the culture of making the law in relation to media?
Well, yes, this is a difficult question, and I also would like to pick some ideas of what we have just heard from Cuba. That, for instance, this great wish to have this willingness of society, of everybody to have a new media law in Poland. You are waiting for this law, you expect it, and you think that it will be better than the previous one, that it will solve many issues. In my country also we are waiting for such a law related to public service media. Before this turbulence around Bulgarian elections and governments, there was a draft about new public service funding. But now it is, obviously, this draft is blocked. So this is the big question. Can we rely on the law only? And this is difficult to say that the law will solve all the issues, because the law also can be captured. The lawmaking, it can be captured by different, not only by parties, but different lobbying groups, for instance, that participate in the lawmaking. Also, these changes in the very last moment. Amendments that are made in other laws, but they reflect in third laws. For instance, all these legal techniques that can divert the law from its public goals, that the law should serve the public interest, the interest of society. Especially what concerns this regulatory capture, I would like to give another example. Marius mentioned that it is the capture of the regulatory bodies. So it was a great problem. In the 90s of the last century, now it is a problem, and I would refer to a report of the Secretary General of the Council of Europe from 2017. It is about democracy, human rights, and rule of law. And the constatation is that only half, even less than half of the European states has managed to create independent regulatory bodies. I don't think that now this situation has improved much. Even we could say that the situation has become worse with the regulatory bodies, because, for instance, when these new countries, new democracies were created in the last century, with great enthusiasm, these buffer bodies or the regulatory bodies were created. And we relied very much on them, that these would be really independent structures. Not at all. Even there was an idea that if we include the so-called civil quota in these bodies, or part of the members of these bodies are elected by civil society. Again, this will not improve the situation because, for instance, these big associations, they have also bigger resources than smaller organizations. And then we'll have representatives of only one and the same associations, journalists or media or civil society organizations that will send their representatives on the body. So it's very difficult to find a solution in these bodies. Even in Poland, this body is regulated in the constitution. So this was in Bulgaria, this was a great aim to include this body in the constitution. And now when I'm listening to Kuba and to other comments and to other colleagues, I realize that it is not a solution as well, because maybe what is in the constitution is a dead letter only. And although the constitution should have a direct effect and should be implemented. So I would say that we should start somehow from these administrative practices of this body. Let's think about improving the law, but also how these bodies work internally. What are the administrative practices? What are the relationships within their departments? What kind of activities do they have? Are they transparent enough? What kind of channels for transparency we can suggest for these bodies? Do they, for instance, do they provide regular information about their activities? What about their annual reports? How are these reports presented? For instance, they send reports to the to parliaments, and there is some discussion there, and if the report is rejected, what happens then? Does this body changes its, is obliged to change somehow its practices, and this is also a fault of the parliaments. They don't give also clear guidance to these bodies. When, for instance, their annual reports are rejected, what could they do? They could recommend something. Representatives at the level of the parliament. They don't do that. And there is also a big question about the publicness of these bodies, and also of the public service media. I remember when Karol Kubowicz discussed this matter, he said that the public should own the public service media. But it is not only that. I would say that the public should also have a kind of influence over the regulatory bodies, over the regulatory authorities, because these are not pure administrative bodies of the governmental structure. So you see, there are many issues, and it becomes more and more complicated. But we have to think about these details, and that, like public service media, regulatory authorities, they have to send their reports and have their reports thoroughly discussed by civil society and the public. And does it happen? This is an open question. Whether it happens in our countries and in other countries as well. Give good examples of this kind of accountability.
And that all goes back to the question on accountability, transparency, and public engagement, and making the law. But before I ask the final question and open up space to the debate from the audience, I would like to move to Serbia. Like a couple of days ago, there have been massive protests in terms of society, activists and students protesting against the policy of the RTS. We used to have the same movements here in Poland before 2023. We also know the examples from Slovakia. Can you please, Chedomir, tell us more on what's the implication of the current crisis between the state and the citizens when it comes to Serbia?
With great pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak about this issue, because I don't think that there has been a more consequential issue for Serbia in recent past. If you allow me, I think we'll have enough time. I would just like to give a brief context before addressing this question more directly. So on November 1st last year, there was a tragic accident when canopy at a railroad station in Serbia's second largest city, Novi Sad, collapsed, killing 15 people. This event sparked a wave of demonstration, and people were protesting because they were afraid that the same thing that always happens in Serbia will happen again, and that is that not all who were responsible for this tragedy are going to be held accountable. During one of those protests in late November, some drama art students in Belgrade were attacked. Police came. It did not arrest all the attackers, but it managed to arrest several student protesters as well. As a response, drama art students went back to their department and they announced a complete blockade of their department. That's how everything started. In the following days, one by one, other departments joined, resulting in now, I believe it's more than 60 departments at all the major universities in Serbia being completely blocked. This is the student movement and the student protest that we are witnessing for the past 2 months. In addition to blocking the universities, basically students are participating in daily blocking of intersections that starts every day at 11:52 in all the major cities. That was the time when the canopy collapsed, and they last for 15 minutes, which is in remembrance of 15 people who lost their lives. And in addition to that, periodically they stage large-scale protests, which at certain times take place in front of certain institutions, with which students want to highlight that these institutions are not performing in the public's best interest. And so they protested in front of the Constitutional Court, for example, in front of the Public Prosecutor's Office. And now I come to the direct answer to your question. In the previous 2 months, they staged not one, but 2 protests in front of the RTS, Serbian National Public Broadcaster. So the first protest in front of RTS happened in mid-December, so in the very early stage of the protest. Students were dissatisfied both with the frequency and with the quality of RTS reporting on the protest. So in terms of frequency, I can say that RTS was largely ignoring the protest as an important social event for Serbia. They were, if they reported, those reports were usually brief, mentioned just in passing, lasting for a couple of seconds in a daily newscast. And also when they reported on the protests, they would typically neglect students' demands and students' perspectives. But at the same time, they would feature other interpretations and framings of the protests. So for instance, viewers of RTS could hear President Vučić claiming that students are organized by the West, they receive money from the West, they're fighting over money from the West to overthrow his government. And I must say that as a public, we're used to this kind of rhetoric. We hear it over and over again whenever you need cheap political points or you have nothing to say, you just say, my opponent is organized by the West, they received money from the West to bring me down. But students said, no, you are public service media. You should have challenged that claim. That claim was aired completely unchallenged by RTS journalists. The president obviously didn't offer any evidence to support such claim. There were other examples as well, but I'll stop here. I think it's illustrative enough. Then the first protest happened, and I must say that RTS did increase the frequency of reporting, but most of the problems associated with the way they were reporting still remained. I'll give another example. There was a talk show. They have a very popular central political talk show where they have 4 guests talking about student protests, none of whom were students. They were all professors. And on a side note, they were all male, which is also another trademark of RTS. Speaking of diversity, for some reason, and there is data to support this, RTS is strongly avoiding women experts. So if you have an expert on RTS, it's probably going to be a man, as it happened in this case. Another thing is very illustrative. Out of those 3 professors, only one of them was supporting the protests, the other 3 were strongly opposing them. And considering how widespread and strong support is both from the teachers and the wider academic community, this doesn't seem like a fair and balanced representations of the views that exist in the Serbian public and academic community of student protests. We don't have many public opinion polls, but by those we have more than 60% of Serbian public supports student protests, and the academic community seems very united and stands with students. Tomorrow there is a general strike happening in Serbia, and many departments and research institutes, schools, elementary and high schools also joined. So then the second protest took place 5 days ago on January 17th. It was massive. Tens of thousands of people were in front of the RTS, and something was different this time around. RTS, the protest was staged at the time when they air their central newscast of the day, so prime time, 7:30 p.m. And they devoted substantial airtime to student protests. They had a reporter reporting live from the protest in front of their building. And I think this was the first time that a reporter read their demands in full. That was one thing that happened. The other thing was that they interviewed one of the protesters who was very obviously supportive of students and at the same time very critical of RTS practices, and this was aired live. And probably the most interesting moment for me was when in that live air, RTS camera showed a banner being revealed from the RTS building reading, "RTS workers stand with students," which signals to, RTS has 3 representative labor unions, and one of them supported student protests and their demands. And in their public statement or endorsement of student demands, they also mentioned that for years they have been asking that RTS improves its practices and provide the best coverage in public interest and just, abide with the law on public service media that we have, and it's apparently good, but no one respects it. So I don't know how to close this answer, but this is still something that it's ongoing. And speaking of implications of these protests, I know that there are many people who don't have high hopes for RTS and its practices, but I think there is something different, especially in the way this protest operates. It is leaderless protests, self-organized, rooted in rules of direct democracy. It's very difficult to delegitimize for the government because they completely denounce, they don't want to have anything with opposition parties or anyone. So I think the public listens to them. And when they remind us of what RTS should be doing this time around, we listen. So we'll see how far it gets us.
Thank you, Chedomir, for bringing this Serbian case to the debate. I'm pretty sure there might be some additional questions, but before we open the floor to questions, let's go back to Poland. Civil society organizations, Kuba, have been widely engaged in the latest public consultations in relation to the European Media Freedom Act. But I would like to ask you to wrap up the Polish context.
Oh my goodness.
As in many other countries, this country has become so divided.
Yeah.
And you know, on the other hand, there is a call for deliberation. There is a call for listening, arguing with respect. How do you see deliberation as, let's say, a way to move forward, to integrate the civil society into the discussions?
I don't know how to solve that puzzle, but I think because it's a certain structure which is repeated here. What are the elements which might be giving us a hope or making us despair? The first one is this legal. You mentioned the first mechanism. Basically, you can change it overnight. That was a famous, I think, Dahrendorf who said in 1989. One is Fukuyama. But Dahrendorf said, the creation of civil society has three phases. The 6 month is institution in the sense that there's a work for lawyers. Basically, you can say, okay, and that's happened in Poland. 6 years for a market, 60 years for civil society, and that was means that it has to be organic, rooted, blah, blah, blah. And we were just waiting. We say time is working for us. Nowadays, we know that history has not ended. It's basically going to repeat. It's not only a problem of the end of the history. I think it's like an end of time. It's almost apocalyptic. So everything is, and then people look for the certain anchors. And you are right. We have it in the Constitution. And then the problem with the law, although we are all trying to make it, you can change it overnight. We can change it every time you appear at it's how to make a strong anchor enough. And I think legal questions or the legal solutions are not enough. People very often say, BBC is a model. They're appointed by the basically Treasury, like the Ministry of Treasury, if I remember. The problem with the institution, I think, for all, luckily not only for that part of the world, I think it's the African sayings: if there is no honor, if there is no shame, there is no honor. And I think institutions, without the kind of a civic spiritness of those who are populating those institutions, with a sense of honor, integrity, you can forget us. Because people, if they're able to basically do all the things, I think institutions are enough. It's a question of how, because institutions is like almost synthetic. Institutions in the sense of law. The culture, a kind of a respect to the law, etc. That might take so much longer. It's not guaranteed by itself. So, but I understand we still are trying to make a better legal regulation, although we know that it's not enough. Second is a governance. And I think it's really the question, it's who is appointing whom. And I think for us, at least, I think I was studying it for many reasons, what is a structural element which might prohibit this kind of a hijacking thing? One, and I think Germany is, I'm not an expert of media. I'm rather interested in how people work and how they preserve a memory in terms of museums, many other things. How you can create mechanisms by which history is not overwritten by every single election, although it's open for reinterpretation, but it's not that it's completely, opaque in a sense how you describe the thing. And I think one of the country which is very much kind of, and there is a reason for that, being honest, and Germany was already mentioned, that, without not a kind of, enforced opinion of other after the war, they create a lot of institutions which seems to be kind of having in mind that kind of a concept that people might I think Kant once say, the problem of ruling the nation of devils, it's solvable, it's kind of you can do it. I'm not that sure, but for example, if you see the German media, they have this, there will be more people than on the room, I think. The kind of a council of the regional media is like 70 people. So in a sense, they have a small portion for political parties, different, but basically the safetiness in the ecosystem, it's in the diversity. It's completely, it's not making a first turn, it's very kind of a heavy in a sense, but you cannot create a kind of an electoral outcome which say, now us. Because altogether Polish citizens might have like a 10% of that thing. So it's not, it's intentionally, it's very kind of a heavy and stable. But that gives the shield. Second, it's this Polish, I don't know whether it's, but really recommend you, this Polish concept is not necessarily my idea. My idea is with colleagues like, I don't know, Maciek Strzembosz, etc. And once with forced formulate, I think is hysteric. We don't need that thing. But basically the concept more or less is that you have this kind of, in every institution you has oversight body or I don't know, trust, whoever, programming board, someone who is above the basically execution. And the idea was that, okay, we have a different interest, and let's imagine that that might need, I don't know, 20 people. You create, it's almost like it's like a quota system. You can say, okay, 5% for politicians, 5% for ex-journalists, maybe something for academics, something for, blah, 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 blah. But basically you create a structure which is already, kind of a defined which portion of that thing is somehow delegated or dedicated to the certain group. And then you have a big pool of people, not the small one, like, I don't know, 200-300 people, who basically are people who were, proposed by the certain interest group. So I don't know, NGOs or journalists, etc. They go through the certain threshold, so it cannot be idiots or the, crooks and those kind of things, but basically you can say, okay, they're just people like us in a sense. And the system basically goes that it's randomly select people from those pools. So you cannot have any kind of a political contract with that. And as I said, that mechanism, especially, especially the Italian Republic Bologna was changing that set for every 2 months. The same Siena, Venice much longer. But basically concept was that the randomization, in a sense, is a kind of an anti-corruption mechanism, if you like, because you cannot, the Siena 24 famous, they were closing this famous Civic Palazzo for 24 days without any access of people from outside. So they were, in a sense, it's not that hard. But basically, we are looking for the new institutional setting. Other is this money thing. I think it's important, or the structural thing. I think at least in Poland, there was this kind of I would say algorithmic approach, which means either the Dutch model of pillarization. Okay, maybe but we live in a world of the basically narrow casting, but you can say, okay. It's based on, for sure this pillarization, which is based in the historical context of a religious war. That what it means that you have a pillarized society, that whatever from school to the social care, you can go within your kind of, in a sense, in your own environment. And that's the way to avoid the war. So this pillarization means that every has a small part of that. And it's not a political decision. If you have enough, I don't know, you have a certain parameters to say, yeah, we can broadcast our own program, if you like. It's kind of a mosaic, if you like. But in a sense, it might be safer that winners takes all, if you like. Also on the financial side, in Poland we have, and that was a spécialité de la maison of that region, for sure this mechanism of a tax allocation, which is in Poland 1.5% of a personal income tax. It means 1.5 billion zloty every. I was behind that in a sense, but I'm not very proud of that because a lot of money goes to basically individuals, not institutions. But you have a serious contemplation. What is the role of the institutions, like for public benefit? Word public is important. So assumption is that it's not the government who is giving them money on this kind of a discretional basis, but basically citizens, they think, okay, this is a in a sense, credible organization, so they make decision. There are several other institutions which are basically have a very similar situation, having a public purpose, but being kind of in separation, arm's length from the government, which obviously has. With political parties, we have algorithms. With the church, not yet, but basically concept of a 1.5% in Hungary appeared from Italy as a church mechanism, in a sense. So basically, again, you have money which people basically give to any given religion, if you like. Public media is not that far from here, if you like, to think that part of the funding, which otherwise is controlled by the government, since we know that mechanism, it might have its own kind of, devices, but, think creatively. And the last thing it was one of the, it's from Poland, so name will tell you nothing. But the guy, he said, okay, the only thing is that we have to measure the quality of media. And as I was a member of a programming board, I have every day this kind of a milliseconds of what people are watching. And the fact that people are watching things is not, you can broadcast pornography, people will be watching that. But it's not and especially since I discovered that the only group which was measured in that was people up to 48. I'm already older. But basically the concept was, although the main people who were with the senior citizens, they were not even considered as a part of that measurement because measurement is used for selling advertisement adverts. So it was like a stupid idea. So his idea, anyway, is very kind of aristocratic, if you like. And we're in the university, and obviously he's open for different things. Let's have it's almost like an Oscar thing. Maybe we should take all the professors in Poland, and they can see, and basically they're scoring, and the algorithm of money that goes, what professors might think. Not only on this kind of whether the education or the culture, but they also, professor might have a taste of what is a kind of, in a sense, massive culture, if you like. But anyway, again, it will not appear, but this is a fundamental question. Who is making decision? And one of the idea is, okay, among us are people who have a bit better taste. Obviously, it might be touchy, but since it's so much disparate, you think they solve all this problem. It's a kind of a single solution, and try to imagine. That mechanism probably, we might discuss whether it's professors or other people. But BBC also have a civic panel, so in a sense, if you make a kind of a opinion whether the children education is good in the BBC, it's not based on the general public. It's based on a panel of people who basically have kids and they can see whether what they see, it's worth their money. So anyways, to end, I think that's we still have to experiment in a sense. And the one last thing is that obviously Jacek Kuroń was said, which is probably, you know the person, you've heard the person, he said, don't burn their committees, it was about party, build your own. So the whole thing, and it should not be forgiven, it's to basically to have your own, if you like, media. Not that big, but and there's a big conversation how they might be created, whether local media might be. I'm myself advocating for that thing. I saw that in Norway there was a question of the local media, and you should be aware that for Poland one of the biggest things is the people from the independent media, publishers and media people. They think that the local administration should be excluded, precluded, they shouldn't have a right to issue their own newspapers because a cannibalizing market is a propaganda, blah, blah, blah. But we will have a very strong discussion. What is the value of a local media? Especially, and that last thing, almost, is that this question of a security, because we are now obsessed with that. And the question is, we are in the face of militarizing societies. They can say, you can park that civil society for better time. Now, all together. And there's no place for having too much debates, if you like. And the big question, kind of a live or die question, is whether the kind of a safety net, there are different words, resilience, preparedness, etc., it's actually made of this hierarchic, mechanical orthodoxy. The word fascism is not Hitler. Fasci in Italy is basically that you have those kind of, all those strings being in a one line. That's what it means, fasci. Fasci. So basically whether the strength is that we are all, walking in the one direction, or the defense is in this more kind of organic, you can say pluralistic, innovative organism, if you like, and that's what I think. Last thing is journalism. Yesterday I have a very interesting conversation with the guy who is the biggest expert in education. He was speaking to the All Ministry of Education. He's the author of this famous PISA research, and he said, you know what? You can talk a lot, but the main thing is teachers. If they feel their own integrity, their mental independence, autonomy, that is really the point. So the big question goes whether about journalism, kind of ethos of that profession, integrity of those people, because more and more media are basically corrupted, and that's why if you have those famous, podcasts, etc., people build on their own personal reputation, and people more trust sometimes, not institutions, but individuals. How to revigorate kind of a journalism in this country in that kind of a way, I don't know, but that might be another option.
Thank you so much, Kuba. I suggest we open the floor to questions. And we have the first question already. Professor Lizzie Jackson.
We've been talking today about platforms and how to evolve, how public service media can evolve. Platforms are great, but you need help. Public service media need help to get them going, which means that we've argued, or several of us, that public service media need to be within a network which of civil society, galleries, art galleries, people with archives, and also the public need to get involved. That's what we've just been talking about. That's a distributed shape, organizational shape. And I'm thinking back to ARPANET, the precursor of the internet, which was evolved during the Cold War or post-Cold War to preserve communication. Could public service media in all the different countries, in all their different iterations that we've heard about today, involve sufficient numbers of public institutions, be they galleries or associations or guardians, and the public themselves, so that everybody commits a certain percentage of their time or their effort, or not just money, but goodwill, whatever it might be, to make sure that the public service media is protected. And I think with the problem is the structure at the moment with one organization is easily attackable.
Maybe Marius?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the tech company is becoming a major problem, not only for the public service media, but generally for the journalistic and news media ecology in Europe. And I think on the one hand we have an issue of regulation. It's happening at the EU level, but I think it should happen more. And secondly, when you talk about public service media and journalism as well, I think there is a need for breaking away from tech, from social media and tech platforms. I think this is not a proposition anymore. These are very destructive forces that, especially for public service content, and I know it's not easy, and some companies and some media outlets actually broke away and went out of the social media, but you have to have a certain situation. Now back to the public service media, this actually hides a lot of very important aspects that were discussed here already. And one of them is we discussed two aspects of the public service media. One is the institutional one that has to be solved, and that has to do with funding mechanisms, with governance structures, and they are problematic in some countries and very difficult to solve. On the other hand, it's the other aspect, which is the public aspect, the audience, people actually consuming, and that's actually, and always this tension with in the public service media, the accountability towards the public and the government was there. I don't know what is more important, but I think the one to the public is really important, because if you don't have the public, you will not actually achieve. So the discussion has to take into consideration this aspect, because if you look at Europe, back to the research that we did in this project State Media Monitor, out of about 600 media outlets that we mapped around the world, only 19, I think is the right number according to the latest studies, were actually qualified as independent public service media. And most of them were in Europe, and most of those were in Western Europe. So thinking about that, I think we have to go back and really try to understand why some public service media systems function. I worked last year on a paper that I just managed to submit, going back and reading more about the beginnings of the public service media, and I tackled this topic from the perspective of the public good, which Kuba mentioned. I think this is essential. When you go back and read about the beginning of the BBC in the 1920s, it was initially set up as a British Broadcasting Company, I think it was called. It was set up by radio manufacturers and actually funded by them as a commercial company. It lasted only, I think, 4 or 5 years, until, first of all, the government realized, whoa, this is important. They can actually get power and we need to control them. But they adopted a system that actually was very good and public service oriented. And secondly, there was the question of funding. How are we going to fund that? And this is how the license fee was invented. people actually using the first radio receivers, they were paying a fee for the program. Now, this is when you look when you look back at the history of the public service media, because Michała you were asking me about what are the various characteristics of media systems that have to be in place for the successful public service media in Europe. When you look at that, I think in history, those public media that really were presented, maybe not very articulated way, but that were presented and accepted as a public good were the most successful. And look at the BBC history, look at the German public service broadcasters, which were accepted and are accepted at least as a main source and trusted source of information. And so look at the Nordic countries. And then when you look at what is happening in Europe, I think there is a very strong connection there between this success as a public good and the various characteristics of the systems. And one of them is, I think there is a correlation, a very strong correlation between countries with weak public services and bad public service media, between countries with mistrust of authorities and very bad politicized public media. And then when you look at what actually worked, you have countries where these things actually exist. So I think the future has to really of public service media has to really take seriously into consideration the public aspect. And in my view, the only way for the public service media to actually be able to survive is to be presented as a public good. Public good was theorized in the 60s. There were books written about that, but I think we have to really understand what in practice public good means. This public goods means in parks, defense services, health in some countries, and this provision has to, in my opinion, to exist in the communication sphere. But for that to exist, you need the public. So the public actually has to buy into this exactly.
Thank you, Marius. Yes, you are completely right. I will just make a few comments and also relate to Lizzie's question. I think that what you have just said about this public good, this is very important. It should be part of the national culture. Public good should be at the center of the national culture. There are such countries. I don't want to blame my country, but public good is just a shallow word, let's say. And it is also other opinions are that this notion of public good is very fluid. And public good is what is good for the government, what is good for the political majority in power, something like that. So we have to think also about the general culture historically in a given country where such public service media truly respected as public service media could be created. Second to this, there are ideas already in these international European documents about relating public service remit to public service partnerships and work with other public institutions. So there is such an idea. But still, I have not heard about a model of this model of a dispersed public service. Maybe it will be successful in some country, but that doesn't mean that it can be successful in all countries. So if it can be used, it cannot be transplanted to other countries. And about the idea what is public good, I think that for many years it was not clear at the European level what does public good mean, in fact. I have read such publications that, in fact, the idea there is that public good is something very fluid. It is, there is no definition of public good at the European level. But now, with some new acts coming from the European Union adopted, for instance, the so-called SLAP directive, there are many paragraphs dedicated to what does matters of public interest mean. But let's think, who explains this? Where is the source of all this? Against the governments of the European Union. So all these ideas, they don't come from civil society or from academic circles, somehow I think that they're imposed. Also about the prioritization of public service content on platforms. Again, this is idea through the laws, through the acts of the European Union. This means the acts of governments, after all.
Thank you, Mariusz. Thank you, Bisera. Are there any other questions from the audience? Yeah, there is.
Konrad Śmaszka, Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights. Thank you for the very interesting discussion. I find it very useful, the mapping exercise that you do, but the whole sort of discussion was a mapping exercise of different media public service models and the ways of media capture. And I wonder whether it would be possible to think of an opposite model when one would study the sort of reverse of a media capture and so the things sort of that we are trying to do now, and to think of the ways to build the resilience to prevent sort of the process of happening again, and to reverse the process of media capture. And it sounds that your newest paper sounds very pessimistic to me, as it suggests sort of a very historic dependency path that, well, there are some countries that are successful because they started well, and it's a long way. So I wonder whether there are any good examples that sort of show that there's ways of rethinking the public service media in a way that will build in the resilience mechanisms and reverse the process. I can think of one example sometimes presented, the Ukraine and the Suspilne public service media, but perhaps there are more that could be useful for us here in Poland.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I'm afraid there is that historical dependency, but that doesn't mean that the history has ended. That doesn't mean societies do not change. On the other hand, really trying to summarize the various models, when you look at across Europe now at public service media only, you have basically not necessarily models, but three cases. You have public service media traditionally strong in the Nordic countries, the countries that I just mentioned, but also in danger. There is a big discussion in most of these places about the future funding model. Then you have public service media that were successfully, let's say, successfully transformed into government propaganda channels, like in Hungary. Again, Poland was on the right path to achieve that, but it stopped, and some other places. And then you have the public service media that became irrelevant. In countries like Romania, the public service media has something like 1% audience share. My question is, like, why is the government bothering to even control them? And when you look at that, you know, it's kind of, I think these are the 3%. If you get into the irrelevant space, I think from there, actually, somebody was asking me what is worse, to be government control or irrelevant. I think both, but if you drop into the irrelevant model, I think it's extremely hard to get out of there. And this is, I think, the lesson that many countries should learn. Just to give you some examples very quickly, I think one example that actually speaks to the historical dependency is the Czech Republic. In the Czech Republic, the public service media managed to protect its independence in spite of many, many attacks. And the question, again, is there are many reasons for that. They have governance structures that are not necessarily ensuring that. But if you remember, 20 years ago, there was the biggest demonstration in Prague after the fall of communism in 2000, was when the Director General of the public television was appointed on a political ground. That's when people in Prague actually took to the streets and they demonstrated until he was fired a week later. And this tells you, going back to the public service value, public good, these are people who actually understood what they are fighting for. Another example is the Lithuanian public broadcaster in our categorization that is one of the public service broadcasters fully independent. So there are cases and there are histories and there are, of course, there is not one pattern of development, but I think, of course, you have to judge the history of public service media also according to the local, the cultural, the social, the economic, factors.
Okay. I think we have time for a final question. If there is a final question or final remark. Yes, Malvina, please.
Thank you for very interesting insights. It was especially interesting for me when, Sadomir, you explained the the civic panels in Serbia, that people were really looking for transparent sources, for transparent information from different angles. And it seems that people are looking for fairness, for transparent information. And also, when we look at media captures and how political parties, they capture media, and we know from the experience, from history, that it's very short term, that then the new political party that wins election then again will capture the media. So it's really short visions, short term goals that they go for. So I was wondering, because you have exchange with politicians, I understand with like Michał, you work with TVP. So I was wondering, since you work with them, you talk to them, you present arguments, you present research outcomes, what is their response? Why are they not so open to discussions? Maybe it's a naive question, and Kuba, you have a lot of experience probably also on that. So I was wondering how this exchange looks like, and what can society, what can we do? How can, I don't know, research funders support it? How can the exchange between academia and policymakers help?
Yeah, sure. So your question was about how politicians respond to those arguments, right? Well, so in Serbia, we were actually not able to bring politicians to any citizens' assembly. So this is the problem, that we have to engage them at all. So I don't have an answer from the Serbian side. But what I know from my colleagues in Montenegro, for example, where politicians who are currently in power, and Montenegro had a recent change of government after 30 years of basically the same structure being in place. So this is a fairly new development in Montenegro, and the public was very excited about it, but then very soon they learned that the new governing structure goes very easily to the same manners and to the same patterns. The only thing that I can say here in relation to your question is that all those who are organizing these kind of exercises, like any type of meaningful civic debate, whether it's a citizen assembly or citizen jury or whatever the form is, you need to find a way to sell it to the politician, to make them believe that this is something that is useful for them, and to be one step ahead of them. Because specifically from the Hungarian case, we learned how easily these mechanisms can be rendered meaningless when politicians can capture them as well. Politicians can use them for their own advantage to legitimize the process and decisions made in advance. So I think this puts greater responsibility on us, because we know all of this. There are examples of that, and you're completely right, 100% right. That's why we are also very cautious when we work with opposition, for example, or when we invite politicians who are in opposition, but are in certain parts of national parliament working on specific issues. We are very wary of their enthusiasm for democratic tools at this stage. So not really an answer to your question, but the most I can say is we need to find a way to sell it to them and outsmart them in that sense.
No, shortly, we're able to have all politicians from all parties and the kind of a closing. And you can see there's a 8 minute, which is kind of a make you believe, 8 minute on the YouTube on the ubóstwo energetyczne, and you have all the process. It is very complicated. We made 600,000 phone calls, which was responded with 113,000 people to select, according to the all statistical rules, 150 people. So the effort to make it kind of a properly in terms of the methodological orthodoxy, so people represent all the parts of Poland, gender, education, etc. To make that box of chocolates, whoa, That's itself is a very, very. Then we spend 5 days. We have 60 ideas proposed by an expert, NGOs, whatever. They deliberated another 60. Then they vote. So the mechanism of delivery, it's in a sense, it's very extensive. And the question is, so what? And obviously, it's very good to say it in academia. So what? We were able to really organize a panel, but not during the conversation. That is basically the idea. But we have people from Peace, from all those parties, and they were so happy to hear that thing. And even that was a public promise that this mechanism of a public jury will be basically similar to the Irish. So there is I call it third chamber of the parliament, which means that certain things, not only because you cannot work with any given 100 people to choose the kind of a model of the helicopter, but everything, and you ask me why the politicians should use it, because it's so hard to sell things. It's a Churchillian moment, but we don't have a Churchill in a sense. So you cannot say it's impossible to win election, basically saying to people things, not that they want to hear, but it has to be said. Retirement age, military service, public media, there are several things which we need a new machinery for the social contract. And the social contract, it's not X platform with people who are, our Trzaskowski is with Zenek right now. Zenek, that's you don't know the name, Zenek. So it's a kind of popular, but it's like you see, it's completely instrumental. We will see. We have a promise that in the parliament there will be one, at least, parliamentary panel, which means that because always it's about the promise. Otherwise, you might have, so much calibrated mechanism. And the question, so what, is important. We have several panels in the cities when the political contract from the very beginning says, okay, we have several, some resources, financial resources. If your agreement is, up to the 80%, we will do whatever, it's your choice. We recently made a very interesting panel, believe it or not, on the Muzeum Sztuki, dobrze mówię? Muzeum Sztuki Nowoczesnej. Okay. It was based on a concept of a selection, again, try to build a kind of a randomized base of the Warsaw artists. Anyway, but we have 25 of them working for 5 days, and the question was very clear. What that new building might provide them? So there was a very small, budget. They say, okay. So anyway, they make a decision. And to conclude, I think more and more, one avenue is the political, and I think it's really, as I said, is a life or death situation. Either we invent, like Athens basically discovered the concept of a randomized lot thing, where they lost a war because of a demagogue. They said, okay, we cannot be seduced anymore. We have to think before, and Athenians are the best. It's not Sparta. They deliberate, and then they'll go in this kind of a phalanga. You know how it's Macedonian phalanga? It's basically one direction, only one direction. They directly go from the kind of a debate to the war. So basically, that was very clear there is a social contract. But what I want to say, one is that we really, on the European level, should test those mechanisms. Otherwise, we will be losing and losing and losing. In Poland, even mentioning that maybe retirement age, we have the lowest in Europe. Retirement should be, it basically means that you are executed. And everybody will do. And the other is to think institutions, including academia, media, many others, museums, how to incorporate that part of a civic participation, which is a kind of a institutional DNA. It's not electing, executives, etc., but how to invite people to be the part of that conversation, especially institutions that normally is aristocratic in a sense, academia, and or the museums, etc. So how to invite people to have that voice. My favorite and the last quotation is from that group of 100 people who were not believing themselves, in a sense, starting that conversation. In the end, they'd say, we are not so stupid. And I think it's true. But once Churchill said, if you lose, a lot of Churchill's words on the democracy is the worst unless you take all the others. He also said, the best way to lose your faith in democracy is 5-minute conversation with the kind of a regular voter. I think he was maybe right in the 5 minutes, but I think 5 days, but it's in the effort. You have to people be educated, to talk to each other, to create exactly what is the public interest. which is created and negotiated, you have to basically be able to leave your original position. It's all this almost veil of ignorance to say, maybe you know, maybe you know. And I think it's a theater, in a sense. I was sitting like here, I think, I was not aware that we have such a good auditorium for those things. In some countries, if you like, what teeth they have in the panels, like in States, or in Britain, is that the public media are making, because it's so theatrical. People can laugh, or people cooking, doing stupid thing. But if you have a public media saying, okay, we have a serious debate. We have a serious debate, we need a full transparency. So then politicians will think twice before they say, okay, there was basically the majorities are huge, to say, if I were a politician, and I think in Germany there was discussion on the retirement age, for example, which is hard to sell. After the conversation, number of people who said, you know what, thinking about myself, my kids, my etc. system, okay, we have to work longer. That was increased by 20%. You don't have a propaganda to do that thing. So I think politicians actually, not the activists, should use that mechanism to make those things which has to be made, not by their executive power, because you are all stupid, but with this kind of a permission, but kind of a consent permission of people who understand what kind of choices we have.
And I think that this is how we stop the debate at this point. Let us thank all the panelists, Bisera, Mariusz, Czedomir, Kuba. We also would like to thank our team from TV Studio for hosting us today. Many thanks to Monica, many thanks to Waldek and Krzysztof. Thank you so much. And we invite you for a dinner. Thank you a lot.
Thank you so much.